Okay, so this is the Bandolier Bag, and it is from the Lenape tribe, which would be from Delaware in the eastern woodlands, and this dates from the 1850s CE, so this is definitely after colonization. This is after the Europeans, come to the United States. I mean, 1850 is just a decade before the Civil War in the United States, so just keep that in mind on time frame. We're kind of zipping through in regards to time. So this is beadwork on leather. And bandolier bags are bags that are based on ones that were carried by European soldiers that were armed with rifles who used bags to store ammunition cartridges. Well, bandolier bags were made by different tribes and First Nations across the Great Lakes and prairie regions. They do differ in appearance. The stylistic difference is a result of personal preference as much as contact with Europeans and Euro-Americans. Also, it would relate to the goods that could be acquired in trade and through travel. The decorative beadwork did not become commonplace until after European contact in the late 18th century, but then Native American artists began to acquire European colored beads known as seed beads. These beads, silk ribbons, and the acquaintance of colonial folk art were stimulating this new idea, new technique of ornamentation, and they had a profound effect on the arts of the native people. So we're seeing how this global interconnection happens between how the art changes, even for the Native Americans after the acquaintance of the Europeans to the New World, so to speak. So Delaware women, as they were forced west onto the prairies as a result of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, they're credited with creating a new style of what's called applique beadwork. And there's a gradual change to these Delaware shot pouches into these colorful bandolier bags. It begins around 1830 when the Delawares witnessed the arrival of thousands of Indians removed from their lands by force to the southeast. The exposure to bandolier bags of the Creek, the Seminole, and the Cherokee Indians is clearly visible in subsequent Delaware developments, but it did not lead to a complete replication of Southeastern style. So a Delaware identity was retained by preserving some traditional elements, and then a very gradual change of other components happened, and the development of a distinct style of flamboyant beadwork. The Delaware understood and followed the Southwestern example of this colorful apparel as an almost defiant expression of their Indian identity. So as the American government was forcing them to leave and trying to take away their tribal identity, this almost seems to be like, okay, well, we're going to use your silk and leather and beads and we're going to make it into our own. So this piece is known as prairie style, and it drew on northern and southern beadwork traditions of the woodlands. An early example of prairie style beadwork is seen in this shoulder bag, and you can see how it's worn on the man right here. So you can see how the strap is going over his arm, and then it would go around like that. So even though this kind of looks like it would go, your head would be right here, it's actually, that would be the shoulder. That's where the shoulder would go. Okay, so the pouch itself is composed of two simple rectangles, one stitched on top of each other. The back rectangle extends above the pouch opening and is ornamented with a band of beadwork. The body of the bag itself is an elaborate field of spot stitch bead embroidery. The abstract geometric designs are very carefully outlined with tiny white beads. The design on the strap is much broader and bolder than the design on the pouch. The pouch of the bag may have become separated from its original strap, so we're not sure exactly if the strap seen here was made at a later date. A bandolier bag made by a Delaware woman is covered with a curvilinear plant motifs in contrast to rectilinear patterns of traditional quilt work. Much of the beadwork on the bandolier bags is apparently inspired by designs observed in American folk art on printed cotton and on commercial ceramics. But the inspiration channeled through dreams, as stated by several of the women artists, is where they said this came from. Dreams did not necessarily give the designs a symbolic meaning, but the creation of these new designs challenged the artist's imagination, thereby giving them an emotional value that went beyond a merely decorative quality. In addition to the glass beads, this Native American Indian bag is decorated with silk ribbons, also procured through trade with Europeans. Much like glass beads, silk ribbon offered new materials with a greater variety of color and choices. In contrast to their native prototypes, these spectacular bandolier bags serve no real practical purpose. So even though it was supposed to mimic and copy what the Europeans used on horseback, it really didn't have the same function when they wore it because it was primarily worn by men on festive occasions. This apparel earned prestige for women artists. So women were the primary artists who made this. Unfortunately, only very few of these bags have any recorded history, so that makes it difficult to identify any specific tribal styles or even personal styles because we have so few. Okay, so that's the bandolier bag, and here's the silk ribbons that you can see, and then the detailed beadwork. And you can, I mean, we tried to get up close here to show you how specific and detailed it is, but it's, unless you actually see it in person, it's hard to really get that full view of what this looked like. But it was a highly cherished piece of clothing by the tribe.